This is a Kaplan-Meier curve, or it's about to be a Kaplan-Meier curve. It's about to be the reproduction of a Kaplan-Meier curve that was presented in a paper in 2014 that we all refer to as the Paradigm HF trial. The real title of the paper, if you want to look it up, is Angiotensin-neprilysin inhibition versus enalapril in heart failure. So you can see why many of us just call it Paradigm HF. This was a medical research study looking at the treatment of heart failure, which is a disease that can kill a human being. In this study, they wanted to test a new medicine called LCZ 696 against an old but decent medicine called enalapril. So what they did is this. They found 8,400 patients about, all who had the disease of congestive heart failure. And they split them into two groups. The first group took enalapril, and I'm going to show you first what happened to those patients. On a Kaplan-Meier curve, days progress along this way, along the x-axis, and the percent alive patients is presented on the y-axis, or as I like to call it, up and down. On the first day of the trial, there were 4,200 patients who were set up to take enalapril. And on that first day, day 0, 100% of them were alive, shown here. Over subsequent days, as often happens, people began to die, unfortunately. And the researchers kept track of what happened to each and every person. So, as days started to proceed, the number of patients started to decrease who were taking enalapril, and the percentage of those patients who were still alive started to decrease as well. Kind of a little bit surprising. If you've looked at a lot of medical research studies, this proceeded in a pretty much linear fashion, which means a straight line. And on as days went by, patients continued to die intermittently of one thing and another, until finally at day 1260, 72% of them were still alive. About 3/4 of them after 3.5 years. That's the first half of the trial, although the trial also had a second arm. Those patients took this new medicine, LCZ 696. On day 0, at the beginning of the trial, 100% of those patients were also alive. And as humans do, due to mortality, patients began to pass away intermittently in this group also. The LCZ 696 does not make you invincible. At first, a few patients died right off the bat, just like the patients who were taking enalapril. But then, as time went on, something interesting began to happen. The percentage of patients at any particular day, as the researcher counted them up, went down. But it went down more slowly than the patients who were taking enalapril. So that when they finally arrived at the end of the trial on day 1260, not 72% of them were still alive, but instead 76% of them were still alive. If you were a doctor, medical researcher, PhD, some other kind of scientist, you're probably used to seeing a graph like this, a figure like this. It's familiar. So far I haven't shown you anything too strange, but this is where it's going to get interesting. I want you to think about this a little differently. These patients, the solid line, who were taking enalapril, each one of them faced a certain risk of dying each day. It was not like a 50-50 chance, or even a 1 in 100 chance. And at this point, we don't even know what it is, because we haven't gotten to that point yet. But they're at some kind of risk of dying every day. And there's a whole bunch of them. And let's just agree for a second that they all face the same risk. Every day, they all face the same risk. As time goes by, this risk starts to sort of catch up with them and intermittently plucks a person out of this group. They die, unfortunately. And thus, over time, the number of people, the percentage of people who are still in the group goes down until we end up at 72% on day 1260. The patients who take LCZ 696 also face a certain risk of dying every day. All 4,200 of them, plus or minus a few, they face a certain risk every day. But their risk is a little bit less. How much less? We're going to have to figure that out with some numbers. But just believe me that they face a little bit lower risk of dying, and that's why with every subsequent day in this medical research study, more of them remain alive. They face a lower risk. Here's what I'm going to do with you, if you're willing. Together, we're going to figure out the daily risk faced of dying for each patient who took enalapril in the Paradigm HF trial. Every day, each of the patients faced a very small but real possibility that they could die. And we know this is true looking back because sure enough, some of them did die over this 3.5 years. Then, we're going to do the same thing with the patients who took the LCZ 696. We're going to figure out their daily risk of dying. And what we're going to find out is apparent on this drawing right here. The patients who took enalapril were at a slightly higher risk of dying each day, and thus, intermittently, in some small way, their population, that group, was whittled away a little faster because they faced a higher risk than the patients who took LCZ 696. We're going to calculate the individual daily risk of dying for the patients who took enalapril and the patients who took LCZ 696. And then, using something I like to call mathematics, we're going to take those two numbers and calculate a third number. The third number is also a daily probability, but it's a daily probability of having your life saved if you take LCZ 696 instead of enalapril. Now we're going to get weird here for a second, and it won't be the last time, because I'm going to bring up something that may sound like science fiction, and that is a parallel universe. What individual daily risk allows us to do mathematically is to create a parallel universe, to conduct this study one time over one period of days with one set of patients, but these patients get to live two separate lives. In one life, the 4,200 patients all take enalapril. And in the second universe, on their second life, They all take LCZ 696. What happens is we have some incredible power in this parallel universe situation. And the power is this. Let me explain. Let's follow one person. In one universe, this patient takes enalapril every day for 1,260 days or as long as they live. The same patient also in a parallel universe gets to take LCZ 696. And watch what we can do. We start following this one patient living in two parallel universes as they travel through their days. On one particular day, something semi-tragic happens because in one universe, in the universe where the patient takes enalapril, that patient dies. But the same patient in the parallel universe where they take LCZ 696, they did not die. And on that day, that patient continues to live onwards. Inherently, this dream of parallel universes is kind of what people want to do when they create what's called a randomized controlled trial like this, like Paradigm HF. They want to create a situation where they can see what happens to the same person, whether they took one medicine or the other. But since we don't have any parallel universes, we have to do the next best thing, which is we get 4,200 patients here, which are generally interchangeable with 4,200 patients over here, and then we follow them both and watch the curves separate if the medicine works. If you've been paying attention so far, you may be feeling curious. You get the basic idea. Patients who take enalapril died faster because they carried a slightly higher individual daily risk than the patients who took LCZ 696. That concept seems okay. What you may be curious about is the actual numbers. What is the individual daily risk of a patient who took enalapril in this study? Their daily risk of dying was 1 in 3,836. Okay. What about the patients who took LCZ 696? Their individual daily risk was 1 in 4,591. A bigger number, but since it's 1 over that number, their daily risk of dying was actually lower. So I mentioned that we could figure out the daily probability of being saved in the parallel universes by taking LCZ 696 instead of enalapril. And that daily probability of being saved is 1 in 23,326. Now we can create a real-life model of your daily chance of having your life saved by being in this group instead of this group. All we need is 449 decks of standard playing cards, 52 cards per deck. Toss out all the jokers and put all 449 decks of cards in a big pile. And then we pick up one of the jokers that we discarded and we toss it in this huge pile of cards, and then we shuffle and shuffle and shuffle and shuffle, and for 23 hours a day we shuffle these cards. Now each patient, each day of this trial faces the equivalent odds of having their life saved of drawing a card out of this huge pile of 23,000 cards and having it be the joker. In this case, the joker is a good thing. You just had your life saved. If you had taken enalapril, you would be dead. Because you took LCZ 696, you are alive. That's it. And I'll show you how to do this for any study with a Kaplan-Meier curve and a ruler and a pencil and a calculator. If you're a skeptic like me, you will doubt that this figure exists in the 2014 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. You'll think I just drew this up out of my imagination. And in fact, if you don't think this figure exists in the paper, you are correct. Because the authors chose to do something a little different in their paper, as is their choice. What they did when they displayed this information in their paper, they wrote not the percent alive, but the percent dead. So it starts at not 100, but 0, which would be way down here, and inches up like this way. Because these two lines are essentially straight, it's very easy for me and my pen to create the inverse figure, the inverse graph. In other situations, it'll be a lot harder, a little harder. Fortunately, a lot of researchers choose to present Kaplan-Meier curves as survival curves, as in how many are still alive as time goes on. So, go look it up. See if you believe that what I drew is the inverse of what the authors published, and we'll see you soon.